The sound of her tooth shattering echoed through the kitchen. Blood poured from Rebecca's mouth as she clutched her screaming toddler, her 6-month pregnant belly pressed against the counter. And her husband, the man she trusted with everything, stood there with his hand still raised. But what Marcus didn't know was that Rebecca's father was already at the door. And William Hartwell III wasn't just any father. He was a billionaire, a former Marine, and a man who'd built an empire by destroying anyone who threatened what was his. This isn't just a story about one woman escaping abuse. It's about 3 generations of violence. A mother who taught her son to hunt wealthy women. A conspiracy to steal millions through child support. 4 previous victims who disappeared. A mistress who lost everything. And a kidnapping that would trigger an FBI manhunt. Marcus thought he'd planned the perfect crime. He had recordings, fake psychiatric evaluations, a history of making women look crazy while he walked free. But he made one fatal mistake. He broke his wife's tooth the same night her billionaire father decided to check on her own. And what happened next would cost Marcus his freedom, his future, his company, his mother's house, and every single thing he'd ever owned. Because when a Marine billionaire goes to war for his daughter, he doesn't just win, he erases you from existence. Stay until the end to hear how Rebecca's father destroyed a serial abuser so completely that even his own mother ended up in federal prison. And if this story speaks to you, if you believe survivors deserve justice, hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss stories of courage, justice, and women who refuse to stay silent. Now let's begin at the moment everything changed. Rebecca Hartwell stood there, 6 months pregnant, holding her screaming 18-month-old daughter Emma, blood pouring from her mouth. She had exactly 3 seconds to make a choice that would change everything. Open the door and tell the truth, or protect the man who just broke her tooth with his fist. What happened in those 3 seconds would destroy a marriage, expose a conspiracy spanning generations, and unleash a billionaire's wrath that would leave nothing standing in its path. But to understand how Rebecca ended up here, bleeding, terrified, trapped in her own home, we need to go back. Back to before the violence became daily. Back to when Marcus Hartwell seemed like the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered into the dark. Back to when love felt like love instead of a cage slowly closing around her. The slap came at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. Nothing special about the day, nothing that would make you think it would be the night everything changed. Marcus stormed through the front door of their modest, suburban home, his face already red with anger. Rebecca knew that look. She'd learned to read the warning signs over 2 years of marriage, the vein throbbing in his forehead, the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Emma was in her high chair, crying because Rebecca had said no to cookies before dinner. Just normal toddler behavior, nothing unusual. But the sound of her daughter's wails mixed with Marcus's heavy footsteps sent ice through Rebecca's veins. "Shut her up!" Marcus's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. Rebecca moved to Emma, lifting her from the high chair, trying to soothe her. "She's a baby, Marcus. Babies cry." It was the wrong thing to say. Rebecca knew it the moment the words left her mouth. But after 2 years of walking on eggshells, after 2 years of measuring every word and action against his mood, she was tired. So tired of being afraid in her own home. Marcus's eyes went dark. "Don't talk back." Rebecca held Emma tighter, the toddler's small body warm against her swollen belly. I'm just saying she's hungry, and..." The slap came fast, full force, open palm across Rebecca's face while she held their daughter. The sound was like a gunshot in the small kitchen. Sharp, wet, wrong. Then came the crack, her front tooth breaking at the root, the nerve tearing, the pulp exposed. Pain exploded through her skull, white hot and blinding. Rebecca stumbled backward, nearly dropping Emma, her hips slamming into the coffee table hard enough to leave a bruise that would last for weeks. Blood filled her mouth immediately. Warm, metallic, too much blood. It poured over her lips, dripped down her chin, splattered onto her white maternity dress. The one she'd bought on sale last week because her regular clothes didn't fit anymore. Emma's screams intensified. The toddler had never seen her mother bleed before. Didn't understand what was happening. Just knew that Mama was hurt and the world had turned scary and dangerous. Rebecca's tongue found the broken tooth. It dangled from her gum by a thread of nerve and tissue, sending waves of agony through her jaw with every heartbeat. She spat blood into her trembling hand and saw it there. Her front tooth, white and jagged, coated in red. Physical proof she couldn't hide this time. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still raised, staring at what he'd done. "Oh God," he breathed. "Becca, I didn't mean to hit you that hard." Rebecca couldn't speak. Her mouth hurt too much. Blood kept flowing, kept filling her mouth faster than she could swallow or spit. Emma clutched at her mother's face with small hands, making it worse, smearing blood everywhere, crying that high-pitched, terrified cry that made Rebecca's heart break. "Okay, okay, we can fix this." Marcus was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "We'll say you fell. You tripped over Emma's toys, hit the coffee table. It happens all the time with pregnant women, right? You got dizzy, you fell. Completely normal." Rebecca wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to grab Emma and disappear into the night and never look back. But she couldn't move, couldn't think past the pain radiating through her skull and the taste of blood and the weight of her daughter in her arms. Then her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The sound cut through the chaos. Both of them froze. Rebecca watched Marcus's face as he saw the screen. "Mom calling." Marcus grabbed the phone, declined the call. His finger was shaking. 10 seconds of silence. Then the phone rang again, louder this time, impossible to ignore. "Dad calling." Marcus's face went white. Rebecca saw panic flash across his features. Real panic. The kind that came from knowing your perfect lies were about to unravel. Her father, William Hartwell III, former Marine, self-made billionaire. A man who'd built an empire from nothing and protected what was his with ruthless efficiency. A man who would destroy Marcus if he knew the truth. The phone rang again and again. Marcus held it, staring at the screen like it was a live grenade. Then came the knock. 3 firm raps on the front door, loud enough to make them both jump. "Rebecca!" Bill's voice carried through the door, through the walls, filling the house with authority and concern. "Open this door right now." Rebecca looked at the door, looked at her husband, looked at her bleeding mouth reflected in the microwave door, a horror show of red and white and terror. Marcus leaned close, his whisper urgent and threatening. "Send him away, or you lose Emma forever." And Rebecca understood. Marcus had been planning for this moment, had insurance, had ammunition, had ways to make her look crazy and unfit and dangerous. He'd been building his case for months, maybe years, waiting for the day when she might finally tell someone the truth. But Rebecca also understood something else. Her father was here. After months of careful isolation, after months of Marcus keeping her away from her family with excuses and manufactured emergencies and guilt trips, her father had shown up, unannounced, worried. Someone had noticed something was wrong. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. "Rebecca, your mother's worried sick. Open this door." 3 seconds to decide. 3 seconds to choose between the cage she knew and the unknown dangers of escape. 3 seconds while blood dripped from her mouth and her daughter screamed and her unborn baby kicked inside her belly like she knew something terrible was happening. Rebecca made her choice. She walked to the door, Emma still in her arms, and turned the lock. The door swung open, and Bill Hartwell's face went from worried to horrified in less than a heartbeat. His daughter stood before him, 6 months pregnant, holding his screaming granddaughter. Blood poured from Rebecca's mouth, painting her white dress and spreading crimson stains. Her front tooth dangled from her gum, barely attached. Emma's blonde hair was streaked with red where she'd pressed against her mother's face. And behind them, trying to look concerned instead of terrified, stood Marcus Hartwell. Bill's Marine training kicked in immediately, assess the threat, protect the innocent, neutralize the danger. "Get behind me, Rebecca." His voice was calm, controlled, deadly serious. "Now, Billionaire." Rebecca stumbled behind her father, clutching Emma. The toddler reached for her grandfather, crying, "Papa, Papa," in that heartbreaking way that made Bill's chest tighten. Bill turned to Marcus, and his eyes held the kind of cold fury that came from 20 years of military service. and 40 years of crushing anyone who threatened his family. What did you do to her face? Marcus put on the performance of his life. Concern, confusion, innocent husband dealing with a terrible accident. Thank God you're here, Bill. He moved forward, hands out in a placating gesture. It happened so fast. She was holding Emma, got dizzy, you know how pregnancy is, and she fell into the coffee table. I was just about to drive her to the hospital. Bill looked at the coffee table. 8 feet away, no blood on it, no toys nearby. He looked back at his daughter's face at the perfect outline of a handprint in the swelling on her cheek. That's not a fall injury. Bill's voice was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that came before explosions. I've seen combat wounds. I know what they look like. Someone hit her. Well, I would never. Marcus's voice cracked with perfectly calibrated distress. Bill, you know me. I love your daughter. I would never hurt her. A door opened across the street. Mrs. Patterson, their 70-something neighbor, peered out with concern written across her weathered face. Is everything all right over there? I heard screaming. Marcus turned to her, shifting seamlessly into the role of concerned husband. Just a little accident, Mrs. Patterson. Rebecca's pregnant, had a dizzy spell, fell and hit her face. We're heading to the hospital now to get her checked out. Everything's under control. Mrs. Patterson's hand went to her chest. Oh my goodness! Do you need me to call 911? No, I've got it handled. Thank you for checking, though. The neighbor nodded and retreated back inside, potential witness neutralized with charm and lies. Bill pulled Rebecca aside, keeping himself between her and Marcus. He kept his voice low, just for her. Princess, tell me the truth. Did he hit you? Rebecca wanted to say yes, wanted to tell him everything, wanted to collapse into her father's arms and let him fix it the way he'd fixed everything when she was a little girl. But Marcus was already pulling out his phone, and Rebecca knew what was coming. Bill, I need to show you something. Marcus's voice was calm now, measured, the voice of a man doing the right thing even though it hurt. I've been worried about Rebecca for weeks. Since Emma was born, she's been struggling. He pressed play on a recording. Rebecca's voice filled the air, tinny and desperate through the phone's speaker. I can't do this anymore. Sometimes I think about just disappearing with Emma, taking her and running and never looking back. I've thought about hurting myself just to make the pain stop. Rebecca's blood ran cold. That conversation, 2 weeks ago. She'd been talking to her best friend Sarah, venting about how hard everything had become. About feeling trapped and hopeless and scared. She'd had no idea Marcus was recording. Marcus continued, his voice heavy with false concern. She's been having suicidal thoughts since Emma was born. Her therapist diagnosed severe postpartum depression. I have the medical records. I've been trying to get her help, but she keeps refusing treatment. Bill looked at his daughter, confusion and concern warring on his face. Becca, is this true? Have you been thinking about hurting yourself? Rebecca was trapped. If she said yes, she proved Marcus right, proved she was unstable and dangerous and unfit to care for Emma. If she said no, Bill wouldn't believe the recording was real. Either way, she lost. Bill understood strategy, understood when he was outmaneuvered. His daughter was bleeding, but Marcus had prepared for this confrontation, had built his defenses, had evidence that would make Rebecca look dangerous if Bill tried to force her to leave. If Bill called the police right now, Marcus would show them the recording, would paint Rebecca as mentally unstable, suicidal, a danger to herself and her child. And without proof of what Marcus had done, without witnesses, without documentation, without anything but blood and a broken tooth that could theoretically come from a fall, the police might believe him, might take Emma away from Rebecca for her own safety. Bill made a tactical decision. Retreat now, regroup, build a case, come back with overwhelming force. I'm taking her to the hospital, he said to Marcus. You're staying here. Of course, Marcus agreed easily. I'll clean up, get Emma's overnight bag ready. You take care of her, Bill. That's what matters. Bill turned to Rebecca. Get in my car, now. But Rebecca whispered, her voice thick with blood and desperation. Dad, if I leave without Emma, he'll file for emergency custody tonight. He has that recording. He'll say I abandoned her. I'll lose her. Bill's face tightened as he realized the trap. Marcus had planned this perfectly. Rebecca couldn't leave without Emma, couldn't take Emma without looking like she was kidnapping her own child while mentally unstable. Every path forward led to losing. Rebecca made the hardest decision of her life. Dad, I'm fine. It was an accident. I just need to go to the hospital, get my tooth fixed, and come back home. The lie tasted like blood and shame. Please, you're making this worse. Just let me handle it. Bill stared at his daughter, and Rebecca saw the moment his heart broke. Saw him realize she was lying to protect herself and Emma. Saw him calculate the odds and understand that forcing this confrontation now would end badly. Princess, please go. I'll call you tomorrow, I promise. Bill Hartwell left his daughter in that house with the man who'd broken her tooth. Left because staying would make things worse. Left because sometimes retreat was the only way to win the war. But as he walked to his car, his hands were already reaching for his phone, already calling his wife, already assembling the empire of resources at his disposal to destroy the man who had hurt his little girl. The door closed behind him. Marcus smiled at Rebecca. Good girl. Now let's get you to that hospital. Can't have you looking like this, can we? Rebecca stood in her kitchen holding her traumatized daughter, blood still dripping from her mouth, and understood with perfect clarity that she'd just chosen to stay in hell to keep her child safe. But she also understood something else. Her father knew now. He'd seen the blood, the fear, the lie in her eyes when she said it was an accident. William Hartwell III knew his daughter was trapped in an abusive marriage, and Rebecca knew her father well enough to know what came next. Marcus had made a fatal mistake tonight. He'd drawn blood in a way that couldn't be hidden. He'd threatened the wrong man's daughter. The Billionaire's War was about to begin. To understand how Rebecca Hartwell ended up married to a man who broke her teeth, you have to understand how good Marcus was at being exactly who you needed him to be. 2 years earlier, Rebecca had been a different person. 26 years old, working as a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm in Seattle, living in a condo her father had bought her, but she pretended she'd purchased herself. She had friends, hobbies, a life that felt full and real and hers. She also had a father worth $800 million who wanted her to marry the right kind of man. Someone from a good family, someone with old money and the right connections, someone Bill Hartwell could respect and trust with his daughter and his future grandchildren. Rebecca had dated those men, had endured countless dinner parties where Yale graduates with trust funds talked about their portfolios and their family's vacation homes in the Hamptons. Men who saw her as a connection to her father's empire, not as a person worth knowing. So when Marcus Hartwell bumped into her at a charity gala, her father's foundation event, black tie, 500 guests, and apologized with a smile that made her stomach flip, Rebecca thought it was fate. She had no idea Marcus had researched her for 6 months before engineering that collision. Had no idea he'd studied her social media, learned her schedule, identified her vulnerabilities with the precision of a predator selecting prey. All Rebecca knew was that this handsome man in the affordable suit, not Armani, not Hugo Boss, just a nice off-the-rack suit that suggested he worked for a living, was paying attention to her like she mattered. I am so sorry, Marcus had said, steadying her after their collision. I wasn't watching where I was going. Are you okay? I'm fine, Rebecca had laughed. Hazard of these events. Too many people, not enough space. Tell me about it. I always feel out of place at these things. He gestured to the room full of Seattle's elite. I'm just a VP at a tech startup. Not exactly old money. There it was. The hook. I'm not like them. I'm normal. I'm real. I'm someone you can trust. Rebecca had taken the bait completely. They talked for an hour at that gala. Marcus had been charming, funny, self-deprecating. He'd asked about her work, her interests, her opinions. Hadn't mentioned her father once. Hadn't tried to impress her with his own accomplishments. Just listened like she was the most fascinating person in the room. When he'd asked for her number, Rebecca had given it without hesitation. The flowers started arriving the next day. Not expensive roses or orchids that screamed trying too hard. Just simple daisies with a handwritten note. Had a wonderful time talking to you. Would love to do it again sometime. Marcus. Then came the coffee dates. The dinners at mid-range restaurants where they split the check. The long walks around Green Lake where they talked about everything and nothing. Marcus presented himself as a hardworking guy climbing the corporate ladder, trying to make something of himself, not interested in her father's money or connections. It was all a lie, meticulously crafted. Rebecca's best friend Jennifer had been suspicious from the start. "There's something off about him," she'd said after meeting Marcus for the first time. "I can't put my finger on it, but he asks a lot of questions about your family, about your dad's business, about your trust fund. He's just interested in my life," Rebecca had defended. "Not every guy is after my money, Jen." But Jennifer had been right. Marcus had been gathering intelligence, learning about Rebecca's relationship with her father, the tension over her independence, her desire to prove herself, her frustration with Bill's overprotectiveness. Marcus had identified exactly how to position himself as the opposite of everything Bill wanted for his daughter. 3 months into their relationship, Marcus had proposed on a beach at sunrise. Romantic, spontaneous, perfect. He'd used Rebecca's own money to buy the ring. His credit card had been declined. Oops, could she spot him? He'd pay her back. And Rebecca had thought it was endearing that he wasn't wealthy, that he loved her for her and not for what her family could provide. Bill Hartwell had smelled a rat immediately. "I want to hire an investigator," he'd told Catherine, his wife, after meeting Marcus for the first time. "Something's wrong with this guy. He's too perfect, too interested in Rebecca's life, too eager to move things forward." Catherine had been more cautious. "If we push too hard, we'll lose her. You know how she is about proving her independence. If we tell her we don't approve, she'll marry him just to spite us." So Bill had taken a different approach. He'd hired Jacob Torres, ex-FBI investigator, to do a deep background check. And Jacob had found things: sealed juvenile records, a previous engagement that ended abruptly, debt that Marcus had carefully hidden. Bill had brought the findings to Rebecca 3 weeks before the wedding. "Something's off about him, Princess. Give me 6 months to vet him properly. Just 6 months. If everything checks out, I'll give you the biggest wedding that Seattle's ever seen." Rebecca had exploded. All the frustration of growing up as a billionaire's daughter, all the time her father had interfered in her life because he thought he knew better, all the resentment of never being allowed to make her own choices, it had come pouring out. "You think your money makes you smarter than me? You think I can't choose my own husband? I love him, Dad, and I'm marrying him with or without your blessing." Catherine had put a hand on Bill's arm, her expression calm but resigned. "Let her go. If we fight this, we lose her." So Bill had reluctantly agreed to pay for the wedding. 200 guests, $500,000 budget, the best venue in Seattle. Because even though he didn't trust Marcus Hartwell, Bill loved his daughter more than he trusted his instincts. It was a mistake that would haunt him for years. The wedding had been beautiful. Marcus's vows had brought tears to half the guests' eyes. "I promise to protect you and our future children forever, to honor you, cherish you, and build a life with you that's based on love, not money. You're my whole world, Rebecca." Bill had watched from the front row, his jaw tight, knowing something was wrong but unable to stop it. He'd caught Marcus disappearing for 2 hours during the reception, seen him flirting with bridesmaids. Notice how much Marcus drank when he thought no one was watching. But it was too late. Rebecca was married, and the cage was beginning to close. The first few months had been good. Marcus had quit his job. "I wanted to focus on starting our family," he'd said, and lived off Rebecca's $15,000 monthly trust fund. He'd been attentive, helpful, the perfect husband. Then month 4 arrived, and the mask began to slip. It started with Diane, Marcus's mother. She'd come to visit and criticized everything Rebecca did: the way she cooked, the way she cleaned, the way she dressed. And when Rebecca had agreed with one of Diane's criticisms, just trying to be polite, to get along with her new mother-in-law, Marcus had grabbed her arm in the kitchen, twisted it hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises that lasted a week. Then came the tears, the apologies, the explanation about his father who'd beaten Diane for 30 years. How Marcus had sworn he'd never be like his dad. How he needed Rebecca's help to be better. "Please," he'd begged, crying real tears. "Help me. I don't want to be him. We'll go to couples therapy. I'll do whatever it takes." Rebecca had believed him, had thought love could fix him, had thought she could save him from becoming his father. The therapy never happened, but the abuse escalated. Every 2 to 3 weeks, a new incident, a shove, a grab, an accidental elbow to her ribs, always followed by flowers and tears and promises, always with an excuse, work stress, money problems, something Rebecca had done wrong. Rebecca stopped telling her friends, stopped seeing them as much. The isolation that Marcus had engineered so carefully became self-reinforcing. She was ashamed, afraid, convinced herself she was overreacting. When Emma was born, things got worse. Rebecca developed mild postpartum depression, completely normal, treatable with therapy and medication. She saw a therapist 3 times, got prescribed antidepressants, started to feel better. Marcus saw an opportunity. "You're crazy now," he'd said during one of their fights. "No one will believe you over me." Courts favor fathers when the mother is mentally unstable. He'd started recording their conversations without her knowledge, building his case, creating evidence that Rebecca was suicidal, irrational, a danger to herself and Emma. By the time Emma was 18 months old, Marcus had complete control. Rebecca had no job, no access to money beyond her weekly $200 allowance. No car. Marcus had totaled hers in an accident and never replaced it. No friends left after Marcus had convinced her they were toxic influences. She saw her parents once every 3 months, always with Marcus present, always with excuses for why visits had to be short. And then Rebecca got pregnant again. 6 months along now, another girl, growing inside her while her world fell apart. Marcus's reaction had been telling. "Another kid? You trying to trap me?" The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. He was the one who trapped her, isolated her, made her dependent. And now he was angry about the consequences of his own actions. The abuse intensified, weekly became daily, slaps became shoves, shoves became choking. Once until she blacked out, waking up on the kitchen floor with Marcus crying over her, begging her not to tell anyone. Rebecca had started planning to leave, had hidden cash from her allowance, had researched shelters, had practiced what she'd say to her parents. But she'd been too slow. Tonight, when Marcus had hit her hard enough to break her tooth, he'd escalated past the point of hiding, past the point of plausible deniability. And Rebecca's father had shown up at exactly the right moment, or the worst moment, depending on how you looked at it. Now driving to the hospital with Marcus at the wheel, Rebecca held Emma in her lap, no car seat, they'd forgotten it in the chaos, and tasted blood and understood that her life had reached a turning point. Her father knew. Marcus knew that her father knew. And the war that was coming would either free her or destroy her. There was no middle ground anymore. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "When we get to the hospital, you tell them you fell. Understand? You got dizzy, you fell, you hit the coffee table. Simple accident. Nothing suspicious." Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak around the blood. "And tomorrow we deal with your father. Make sure he understands you're fine, that you don't need saving, that you're a happy family." Another nod. But inside, Rebecca was calculating. Her father was Bill Hartwell, former Marine, self-made billionaire, a man who'd crushed competitors and hostile takeovers with ruthless efficiency. Marcus had hurt the wrong man's daughter. And while Rebecca had to play along for now, had to protect Emma, had to keep up the loss, she knew her father was already planning, already assembling resources, already preparing to go to war. The hospital loomed ahead, bright and sterile and full of mandatory reporters who were trained to spot domestic violence. Rebecca touched her broken tooth with her tongue and felt a strange mix of terror and hope. Maybe someone there would see through the lies. Maybe someone would help. Maybe this nightmare was finally approaching its end. She just had to survive long enough to see it. Bill Hartwell sat in his car 2 blocks from Rebecca's house, hands shaking with rage he hadn't felt since his Marine Corps days. Catherine was on the phone, her voice tight with the controlled panic of a former federal prosecutor who just learned her daughter was in danger. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Catherine demanded. "He broke her tooth, split it right at the root." Bill's voice was steady despite the fury burning through his veins. Blood everywhere. Emma covered in it. And that son of a bitch had the nerve to say she fell. Did Rebecca confirm it was an accident? She lied to protect him, or to protect Emma. I couldn't tell which. Bill closed his eyes, seeing his daughter's face again. The terror barely hidden behind her forced smile. The way she'd clutched Emma like the toddler was the only thing keeping her upright. He has a recording, Kat. Makes her sound suicidal. If I'd forced her to leave, he would have used it against her. Catherine was silent for 3 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice held the cold fury of a woman who'd spent 20 years prosecuting criminals and knew exactly how to destroy them. Then we don't force anything. We build a case so airtight that Marcus Hartwell spends the next 3 decades in prison wishing he'd never met our daughter. I want him erased, Bill said flatly. Not just in prison. I want every trace of him gone. His career, his money, his future, everything. That can be arranged. But first, we need evidence. Real evidence. Medical records, witnesses, pattern of behavior. Bill was already scrolling through his phone contacts. I'm calling Jacob Torres. He did the background check before the wedding, found sealed records we couldn't access. I want him to dig deeper. I'll call my FBI contacts, Catherine added. Those sealed domestic violence complaints can be unsealed if we have cause. And I'm calling you Grace Morrison, best family law attorney in the state. Money's no object. I know. That's why we're going to win. They hung up simultaneously, both already in motion, both activating the machinery of wealth and connections and ruthless determination that came from being powerful people who protected their own. Bill dialed Jacob Torres at 11:30 at night. The ex-FBI investigator answered on the second ring, alert despite the late hour. Bill Hartwell, I need you to drop everything and work on something for me. What do you need? Everything on Marcus Hartwell. And I mean everything. I want his kindergarten records. Every woman he's dated. Every lie he's told. Every skeleton in every closet. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he dreams about at night. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, Last time I looked into him, you told me to back off. Said Rebecca was an adult making her own choices. That was before he put my daughter in the hospital with a broken tooth. Understood. How deep do you want me to go? Scorched earth. Legal, illegal, I don't care. I want ammunition to bury him. I'll have a preliminary report in 48 hours. You have 24. Consider it done. Next call, Grace Morrison. The attorney answered despite the late hour, her voice sharp and professional. Bill Hartwell, this is unexpected. I need the best family law strategy you've got. Domestic violence case. The victim is my daughter. Grace's tone shifted immediately. Tell me everything. Bill gave her the brief version. The broken tooth. The recording Marcus had used as insurance. The trap situation Rebecca found herself in. Recordings can be taken out of context, Grace said thoughtfully. We'll need our own evidence. Medical records going back years. Witness testimony. Pattern of abuse. Can you get me access to her medical history? I'm her father. I'll get you whatever you need. Good. I'll file for an emergency protective order first thing tomorrow morning. We'll also need to move fast on temporary custody. Get Emma away from him legally before he can use that recording. Whatever you need, money's no object. I'll have preliminary paperwork ready by 8 a.m. In the meantime, tell Rebecca not to engage with him. Don't argue, don't defend herself. Just document everything. Every text, every phone call, every interaction. It's all evidence, because Bill thanked her and hung up. His next call was to Catherine. I've got Jacob and Grace on it. What about your end? FBI contact says he can get the sealed records unsealed within 48 hours if we can show probable cause. Marcus's previous victims, there are at least 3 that we know of, all filed complaints that mysteriously disappeared. That's a pattern. That's enough for a federal investigation. Good, what else? I'm flying out there tomorrow morning. Rebecca needs her mother, and I want to be there when this falls apart. He's going to fight dirty, Kat. So will we. That's the difference. We have resources, money, connections, experience. Marcus Hartwell is a small-time abuser who thought he'd hit the jackpot marrying a billionaire's daughter. He has no idea what's coming for him. Bill felt a grim satisfaction settle in his chest. This was what he was good at. Strategy, overwhelming force, protecting what was his. One more thing, Catherine added. We need to prepare for the worst-case scenario. If Marcus figures out we're building a case, he might escalate. Men like him, when they feel they're losing control, they get dangerous. I'll have private security watching the house within the hour. Discreetly, we can't spook him. Understood. They hung up. Bill made one more call to his head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Patterson who'd been protecting Hartwell family interests for 15 years. Patterson, I need a surveillance team on my daughter's house, round the clock. Discreet. If her husband so much as raises his voice, I want to know about it. Consider it done. How dangerous is this situation? He broke her tooth tonight. I'm expecting escalation. Patterson's voice went cold. We'll keep her safe, sir. He won't touch her again. Bill finally allowed himself to breathe. The pieces were in motion. Jacob digging into Marcus's past. Grace building the legal case. Catherine working her FBI connections. Security watching Rebecca's house. Now came the hard part. Waiting. At the hospital, Dr. Elena Rodriguez had seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize one immediately. The 28-year-old pregnant woman holding a toddler, blood pouring from her mouth, husband hovering too close. Every alarm bell in Elena's head was screaming. I need to examine the patient privately, she told Marcus firmly. Hospital policy. I'm her husband. I stay. Sir, I need to examine her injuries without distraction. Waiting room, now. Marcus wanted to argue. Elena could see it in his eyes. But they were in a hospital, surrounded by witnesses, and refusing would look suspicious. He left, shooting Rebecca a warning glance that said more than words ever could. The moment the exam room door closed, Elena activated the domestic violence protocol. Red flag in the system, social worker notified, police on standby. Rebecca, I need you to tell me the truth. Did someone hit you? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I fell. The injury pattern doesn't match a fall. Elena pulled up comparison photos on her tablet. This is what fall injuries look like. Diffuse bruising, multiple impact points. This is what assault looks like. Concentrated force, clear handprint pattern in the swelling. Yours is assault. Rebecca broke. The story poured out between haze and mouthfuls of blood. 2 years of escalating abuse. The isolation. The control. The recording Marcus had as insurance. He'll take my daughter, Rebecca whispered. He has proof I'm crazy. He'll win custody. We have proof he's violent, Elena countered. Medical documentation beats recordings. Let me examine you properly. Let me photograph everything. Let me pull your medical history. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. What Elena found over the next hour made her furious. 8 emergency room visits in 2 years. Bruised ribs, slipped in shower. Sprained wrist, fell downstairs. Black eye, walked into door. Neck bruises with a strangulation pattern. Car accident. Classic abuse pattern. Escalating violence, increasingly implausible excuses. Elena photographed everything. The broken tooth and swollen jaw. The old bruises on Rebecca's arms in a perfect fingerprint pattern. The fading marks on her neck from where Marcus had choked her 3 weeks ago. X-rays revealed more. A fractured tooth root that would require an expensive implant. An old rib fracture from 6 months ago that had healed incorrectly. I'm calling the police, Elena said. You have enough evidence to press charges. He'll use the recording. Let him try. I've been documenting domestic violence for 15 years. No judge in this state will take that recording seriously when presented with 2 years of medical evidence showing systematic abuse. Elena paged Detective Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in domestic violence cases. While they waited, Elena's nurse Maria took DNA samples from under Rebecca's fingernails. She'd scratched Marcus during the assault, leaving physical evidence. Detective Mitchell arrived within 30 minutes. Compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Rebecca, I investigate domestic violence cases. Dr. Rodriguez believes you're in danger. I can't leave, Rebecca said desperately. My daughter. That's exactly why you can, Sarah interrupted gently. Do you want Emma to grow up thinking this is normal? That love includes violence? That men get to hurt women? Rebecca flinched like she'd been slapped. Emma had witnessed everything tonight, had seen Daddy hit Mommy, had learned at 18 months old that the people who were supposed to love you could also hurt you. What do I do? First, you tell me everything. Rebecca did. Sarah recorded it all, her expression growing darker with every revelation. The financial control, the isolation, the escalating violence, the recording Marcus was using as a weapon. The recording doesn't matter, Sarah said when Rebecca finished. We have evidence, medical records going back 2 years. Photos, DNA, pattern of abuse. You have a case. So I can leave tonight? We'll get you an emergency protective order tomorrow morning. Tonight, is there somewhere safe you can go? Rebecca started to answer, but the door burst open. Marcus stood there with a hospital administrator, his face a perfect mask of concern. There you are, honey. They told me you'd be discharged soon. He saw Sarah, saw Dr. Rodriguez's expression, and panic flashed across his face before he locked it down. What's going on? Why is there a detective here? The administrator, an older man in an expensive suit, looked uncomfortable. Mr. Hartwell, your wife requested privacy during her examination. She's my wife. I have a right to be here. Marcus pulled out a folder. Actually, I'm glad you're all here. I need to show you something important. He handed papers to the administrator. Court-ordered psychiatric hold for my wife. She's been diagnosed with severe postpartum psychosis, suicidal and homicidal ideation. I need to get her into treatment before she hurts herself or Emma. Rebecca's blood ran cold. The document looked official. Had a psychiatrist's signature. Dr. Richard Stevens. Had today's date. Claimed Rebecca was a danger to herself and others. It was completely fake, but it looked real. If there's a psychiatric hold order, the administrator said to Dr. Rodriguez, we're required to... This is dated today, Elena interrupted sharply, before the injury occurred. How did you get a psych hold before she was injured? Marcus fumbled. Her therapist warned me this morning that she was declining, that she might do something drastic. I got the order as a precaution. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm calling the judge who supposedly signed this, Judge Martinez. I know her personally. She'd want to know if her signature is being used fraudulently. You can't hold her here. Marcus's composure was cracking. Emma needs her mother. Mr. Hartwell, the administrator said carefully, if your wife is a danger as this document claims, then Emma shouldn't be with her at all. Marcus realized his mistake. I meant she needs treatment. I can care for Emma while Rebecca... His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, typed something quickly. 5 minutes later, Diane Hartwell arrived. Marcus's mother swept into the exam room like she owned it. 60 years old, perfectly coiffed, with Emma balanced on her hip. The toddler was calm now, eating cookies, seemingly recovered from the trauma. Poor thing, Diane cooed, looking at Rebecca with false sympathy. Marcus called me, said you had an accident. I picked Emma up from the house so you could rest and get treatment. Rebecca lunged for her daughter. Give her to me. Diane stepped back smoothly. Doctor, is she stable enough to care for a child right now? She looks quite agitated. Elena started to say Rebecca was fine, but Diane was already playing the recording Marcus had sent her. Rebecca's voice filled the exam room. Sometimes I think about disappearing with Emma, taking her and running. I've thought about hurting myself just to make the pain stop. The administrator's expression changed. Security appeared in the doorway, ready to intervene if Rebecca became violent. Mrs. Hartwell, Sarah tried, we have reason to believe. Believe what? Diane's voice was sharp. That my son takes care of his mentally ill wife? That he's trying to protect his daughter from a mother who's admitted to suicidal thoughts? That he's the victim here? No, Rebecca screamed. You can't take her. She's my daughter. She lunged again. Security grabbed her arms, held her back gently but firmly. Emma started crying, reaching for her mother. Mama! Mama! Diane walked out of the exam room carrying Emma, walked right past the detective and the doctor and the security, because she had a recording that made Rebecca sound dangerous and no one could stop her. The door swung shut. Rebecca collapsed, her screams echoing through the emergency room. Dr. Rodriguez caught her before she hit the floor, helped her into a chair, tried to calm her. But Rebecca was beyond comfort, beyond rational thought. Her worst fear had just come true. Marcus had taken her daughter, and everyone in that hospital had watched it happen and done nothing to stop it. 24 hours after Diane walked out of the hospital with Emma, Rebecca sat in her parents' mansion, staring at nothing. The temporary crown on her broken tooth throbbed with every heartbeat. Her breast ached. She hadn't seen Emma in a full day, hadn't been able to feed her or comfort her or explain why Mama had let Grandma take her away. Bill and Catherine sat across from their daughter in the library, watching her fall apart. "We filed the emergency protective order this morning," Catherine said gently. "Usually I approved it. Marcus can't contact you or come within 500 feet of you." Rebecca laughed bitterly. "He already took Emma. What does a piece of paper matter?" "The custody hearing is in 48 hours, Bill added. "Grace Morrison is building our case. We're going to get Emma back." "He has that recording. He has a fake psychiatric evaluation. He probably has a dozen other pieces of evidence I don't even know about." Rebecca's voice cracked. "He's been planning this for months, maybe years, and I was too stupid to see it." "You weren't stupid, dud," Catherine said firmly. "You were targeted by a predator who's very good at what he does. That's not your fault." Before Rebecca could respond, the doorbell rang. Bill's assistant appeared. "Sir, Jacob Torres is here. Says he has the report you requested." "Send him in." Jacob entered carrying 2 thick files and a laptop. Ex-FBI investigator, mid-40s, the kind of man who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "You're not going to like what I found," he said without preamble. "Show me." Jacob opened the first file. "Marcus Hartwell has done this before. Multiple times. He has a pattern of targeting wealthy women, isolating them, abusing them, then using the legal system to make them look crazy when they try to leave." He pulled out police reports. 4 years ago, Amanda Pierce, daughter of a construction company owner worth $30 million. 3 police reports: assault, strangulation, attempted murder. All dropped. Amanda disappeared, changed her name, moved to Seattle. Jacob queued up a video call on his laptop. A woman appeared on screen. Early 30s, professional clothes, haunted eyes. "This is Amanda Cooper now," Jacob explained. She agreed to testify. Amanda's story poured out, eerily familiar. The charm offensive, the quick engagement, the isolation, the violence that escalated until she feared for her life. And when she tried to leave, Marcus had threatened her with revenge porn, professional destruction, anything to keep her trapped. "I dropped the charges because I was terrified," Amanda said, her voice hollow. "Moved 2,000 miles away. Changed my name. Started over. 2 months later, I saw his engagement announcement. To Rebecca. I tried to warn her, sent a Facebook message. She blocked me." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. "I remember that message. You said he was dangerous, that I needed to call off the wedding." "Marcus told me you were his crazy ex," she whispered. "Said you were obsessed with him, couldn't accept that he'd moved on." "That's what he tells everyone." Amanda's smile was sad and knowing. Classic abuser tactic. Discredit the previous victims so the current one doesn't believe them. Jacob pulled up the second file. Before Amanda, there was Jennifer Schultz in 2012. Pressed charges. Marcus pleaded down to anger management. Got the record sealed. Before Jennifer, Sarah Martinez in college. Campus police report. No charges filed. He spread the reports across the table like a prosecutor laying out evidence. Marcus Hartwell has a 15-year pattern of targeting women, abusing them, and using their own trauma against them. He's done this at least 4 times that I can prove. Probably more that I haven't found yet. Bill's jaw was tight. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because he's careful. Picks victims who have something to lose. Wealthy women who can be painted as privileged and vindictive. Women with mental health histories he can exploit. He builds his case before he ever raises a hand, so when the relationship ends, he has all the ammunition he needs. Jacob opened his laptop, pulled up email records. Which brings me to the financial motive. Marcus Hartwell is $350,000 in debt. Gambling debts to illegal bookies, credit cards maxed out, loans from people you don't want to owe money to. He showed them emails between Marcus and an unknown recipient, found these on his computer. He researched Rebecca for 6 months before accidentally meeting her at your foundation gala. Learned her schedule, her vulnerabilities, her relationship with you, Bill. The emails were damning. Marcus to a friend, found the perfect mark. Father's worth 800 million. She's lonely, naive, desperate for love. Once I knock her up, I'm set. Child support from a billionaire equals retirement plan. Rebecca made it sound like she'd been punched. Another email, this one from Diane to Marcus 2 years ago. Do exactly what your father did to me. Make her dependent, pregnant and isolated. Then you control everything. Her father's fortune will fund your life through child support. Aim for 3 kids minimum. His mother taught him. Catherine breathed. Diane Hartwell taught her son how to abuse women for profit. Jacob nodded grimly. Diane's husband beat her for 30 years. She stayed, normalized it, then passed that trauma down to Marcus. Taught him that violence works, that women are resources to be exploited, that the system protects abusers if you know how to work it. Rebecca was crying now, great heaving wads that shook her pregnant belly. I was never a person to him, just a bank account. Every I love you was a transaction, Jacob confirmed. Every kiss calculated, every moment of intimacy designed to keep you trapped and productive. You were a 2-year investment that was supposed to pay out millions in child support. Bill stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I want him destroyed. Completely. The doorbell interrupted him again. This time, Bill's assistant looked nervous. Sir, there's a woman at the gate. Says her name is Vanessa Cole. Says she has information about Marcus Hartwell that will save Rebecca's daughter. Rebecca's head snapped up. Marcus's mistress. You know about her? Catherine asked carefully. I suspected. Found texts on his phone 6 months ago. Confronted him. He said she was just a co-worker who had a crush on him, that he'd never encouraged her. Rebecca laughed bitterly. Let me guess. He was sleeping with her. Do you want me to send her away? Bill asked. Rebecca thought about it. Thought about the woman who'd been sharing her husband's bed while Rebecca was pregnant and terrified and trapped. Thought about the rage she should feel. But mostly she thought about Emma, about getting her daughter back, about stopping Marcus before he destroyed anyone else. Let her in. Vanessa Cole was not what Rebecca expected. 26 years old, professional, dressed in business casual, with puffy eyes that suggested she'd been crying for days. She stood in the Hartwell's library, surrounded by wealth she could never dream of possessing, and refused to meet Rebecca's eyes. I'm not here because I'm a good person, Vanessa said quietly. I'm here because he destroyed me too. Why should I listen to you? Rebecca's voice was cold. You slept with my husband. I didn't know he was married, not at first. Vanessa pulled out her phone, showed text messages. He told me you were separated, that divorce was in progress, that you were keeping Emma from him and he was fighting for custody. The messages painted Rebecca as unstable, vindictive, using Emma as a weapon, Marcus as the devoted father struggling against an unreasonable ex. I believed him, Vanessa continued. I fell in love with him, thought we'd start a family together. When did you find out the truth? 3 months ago, I got pregnant. The room went silent. Rebecca felt her stomach drop. Vanessa's voice cracked. I told Marcus about the baby. I was so happy, thought it was the start of our future together. He told me to get an abortion, said it was bad timing. When I refused, when I said I was keeping the baby with or without him, she lifted her shirt. Bruises covered her ribs, fading now, but still visible. Yellow and green and purple, the rainbow of old trauma. He beat me, came to my apartment drunk and furious, kept screaming that I was going to ruin everything, that I was destroying his plan. Vanessa's hands shook as she lowered her shirt. I fell, hit the corner of my coffee table, started bleeding. Tears ran down her face. Called 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. At the hospital, they told me I'd lost the baby, 8 weeks along. Gone. Rebecca couldn't breathe. Oh my God. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I was going to say yes. Then Marcus sent me an email. Vanessa showed them her phone. The message was brief and devastating. Press charges and I'll tell police you attacked me. I have witnesses who will say you're obsessed, stalking me. You'll lose your job, your reputation, everything. I didn't press charges, Vanessa whispered. I stayed silent, went back to work, pretended nothing happened. Why come forward now? Bill asked. Because last week I saw the news. Local woman hospitalized, husband arrested for assault. Saw Rebecca's name. Realized I'm not the only one. That I'll never be the only one unless someone stops him. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket. I work at Marcus's company. I have access to financial records. He's been embezzling $200,000 over 2 years. I also have emails between him and Diane planning Rebecca's marriage like a business deal. Jacob took the flash drive, plugged it into his laptop. The evidence that appeared made everyone in the room go still. Spreadsheets showing systematic theft from the company, wire transfers to offshore accounts, documentation of every penny Marcus had stolen, and emails, dozens of them. Diane and Marcus planning every step of Rebecca's seduction and entrapment. Make her dependent, pregnant and isolated, then you control everything, Diane had written 2 years ago. Her father's fortune will fund your life through child support. Aim for 3 kids minimum. Marcus's response, already working on it. Once I get her pregnant the first time, she's trapped. Second pregnancy seals the deal. By the time I file for divorce, I'll have years of evidence that she's mentally unstable. Courts always favor the stable parent. Rebecca was going to be sick. Every moment of her marriage had been calculated. Every pregnancy planned not out of love, but strategy. Every kind word a manipulation. He killed my baby, Vanessa said, her voice hollow. Beat me until I miscarried, then threatened me into silence. Now I'm going to kill his future. I'll testify. I'll hand over every piece of evidence I have. I'll make sure he never hurts another woman. Grace Morrison, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. With this evidence, we have him. Medical records showing Rebecca's pattern of abuse. Amanda's testimony establishing his history. Vanessa's evidence of financial crimes and conspiracy with his mother. He's looking at serious prison time. But what about the custody hearing? Rebecca asked desperately. That's in 48 hours. He still has Emma. We're going to prove that Diane is an unfit guardian, Grace explained. She taught Marcus how to abuse women. She's an accomplice. And once we show that, once we demonstrate the entire conspiracy, the judge will have no choice but to give Emma back to you. Bill looked at Jacob. Do we have enough? More than enough. Between the medical evidence, the pattern with previous victims, the financial crimes, and Diane's emails teaching him abuse tactics, we could put him away for 20 years even without the assault charge. Then let's do it, Bill said grimly. File everything, criminal charges, civil lawsuit, custody motion, all of it. I want Marcus Hartwell buried so deep he never sees daylight again. But even as they planned their strategy, even as they assembled their evidence and prepared for war, none of them realized how desperate Marcus would become, how dangerous a cornered predator could be, how far he'd go to protect the life he'd built on lies and violence. The custody hearing was still 48 hours away, and Diane Hartwell was about to make a move that would change everything. The next morning, Rebecca's phone rang. Diane's name appeared on the screen. Every instinct screamed not to answer. But Emma was with Diane, and Rebecca would endure any manipulation, any abuse, any horror to hear her daughter's voice. Hello? Rebecca, dear. Diane's voice was warm, grandmotherly, completely at odds with the woman who drugged Emma with Benadryl-laced cookies and walked out of the hospital. I want to apologize for my son, for everything. Rebecca's grip tightened on the phone. What do you want, Diane? I want to make things right. I saw the photos of your broken tooth, the x-rays, the medical records, and I remembered a pause perfectly timed. My husband did the same to me. For 30 years, I taught my son that was normal. That was love. I was wrong. It was a performance. Had to be, but Rebecca was desperate. If you really want to make things right, bring Emma home. That's why I'm calling. I'd like to bring Emma over to your parents' house. let you see her, let you say, let you spend time with her before the custody hearing. Supervised, of course. Your parents can be there. I'm not trying to take her from you, Rebecca. I just want what's best for my granddaughter. Catherine, who was listening on speaker, shook her head sharply, mouthed, "It's a trap." But Rebecca looked at her mother with eyes full of pain and desperation. "I need to see my daughter." Bill took the phone. "Diane, this is Bill Hartwell. If you want to bring Emma here, you come at 10 a.m. You stay for 30 minutes, supervise the entire time, and then you leave. Agreed?" "Of course, Bill. I understand you don't trust me, but I'm trying to do the right thing. I'll see you at 10. She hung up. "It's a trap," Catherine said immediately. "Probably," Bill agreed, "but we have security. We have witnesses. We're in our own home. What can she do?" Jacob Torres, who'd stayed overnight to coordinate security, looked uncomfortable. "Diane Hartwell has been enabling and teaching abuse for 30 years. She's smart, she's patient, she's dangerous. We should assume she is planning something." "Extra security," Bill decided. "Patterson, I want eyes on every entrance. I want someone watching Diane every second she's in this house." "Yes, sir." At 10 a.m., Diane arrived with Emma. The toddler saw her mother and ran, crying, "Mama, Mama," with such joy that Rebecca's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same moment. She scooped Emma up, buried her face in her daughter's hair, breathed in the smell of baby shampoo and innocence. "Hi, baby. I missed you so much." Emma patted Rebecca's face with small hands. "Mama cry? Happy tears, sweetie. I'm so happy to see you." Diane watched with an expression that might have been regret, or might have been calculation. Hard to tell. Patricia, Rebecca's mother, stayed close. Bill positioned himself between Diane and the exit. Security guards watched from corners, trying to be unobtrusive but failing. 10 minutes passed. Diane sat quietly, watching her granddaughter play with Rebecca. 15 minutes, 20. Then Diane pulled out a container. "Emma, sweetie, want a cookie? Grandma made your favorites." Patricia stiffened. "What kind of cookies?" "Just sugar cookies. Nothing special." Diane opened the container. The cookies inside looked homemade, decorated with colorful frosting. "Emma loved cookies." The toddler reached for one eagerly. Rebecca started to say no, then stopped. If she refused, if she showed suspicion, Diane would know they were on to her. Better to let Emma have one cookie under supervision than create a scene. Emma munched happily. Diane offered one to Rebecca. "You should eat too, dear. You're pregnant. You need your strength." "I'm fine, thank you." 5 minutes later, Emma started yawning, rubbing her eyes, getting that drowsy look toddlers get before nap time. "Oh, she's sleepy," Diane observed. "Let me put her down for a nap. Where's the guest room?" "I'll show you," Patricia said firmly. She wasn't letting Diane out of her sight. "No need, I remember from my last visit. You stay here with Rebecca." Before Patricia could argue, Diane scooped up Emma and headed for the stairs. Patricia followed, but Diane was already gone, moving with surprising speed for a 60-year-old woman. Rebecca felt unease creep up her spine. Something was wrong. Diane's movements were too purposeful, too prepared. "Mom, go check on her," Rebecca urged. Patricia hurried upstairs. 30 seconds later, her scream echoed through the house. "She's gone! Emma's gone!" Rebecca ran, pregnant belly making her clumsy, but she ran anyway. Up the stairs, down the hallway, into the guest room where, empty, window open, ladder propped against the outside wall, fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway leading to the back gate. Diane's car was gone. On the bed, a note in Diane's handwriting. "Marcus is right. You're unfit. Emma stays with me until my son is free. Try to find us." Rebecca's scream could have shattered glass. Bill was already on the phone with 911. "This is William Hartwell. My granddaughter has been kidnapped. 18-month-old female, blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing." Rebecca collapsed. Contractions hit her like a freight train. Stress-induced, premature, dangerous for a 6-month pregnancy. She grabbed her stomach, felt the baby inside her moving frantically, responding to her mother's terror. "Cat, call an ambulance, Bill," Bill barked. "Rebecca's in labor." Catherine was pale but moving, already dialing. Security scattered, checking cameras, tracking Diane's car, calling every resource they had. But Diane had planned this perfectly, had studied the security system during previous visits, had identified the blind spots, had positioned her escape vehicle in advance. She drugged Emma with children's Benadryl baked into cookies, legal dose but enough to make a toddler drowsy and compliant, had climbed out the window with a sleeping child while everyone watched the stairs, and now she was gone. Amber Alert was issued within minutes. Every police officer in the state got Emma's photo, but Diane had a 30-minute head start, and she'd been planning this for days. Rebecca was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, Catherine holding her hand while she sobbed and contracted and begged God not to take both her daughters in one day. At the hospital, doctors stabilized her. The baby's heartbeat was strong, but Rebecca's blood pressure was dangerously high. They gave her medication, put her on bed rest, monitored both mother and child. "You need to stay calm," the doctor said, "or you'll go into full labor. You're only 6 months along. The baby won't survive if she's born now." But how could Rebecca stay calm? Emma was gone, kidnapped by the woman who'd taught Marcus how to abuse, who'd planned Rebecca's entrapment, who'd drugged and stolen a child like it was nothing. Bill paced the hospital room like a caged animal. His granddaughter was missing. His daughter might lose her second baby. And Marcus Hartwell was somewhere laughing at how perfectly his mother had executed the kidnapping. "I want every resource we have on this," Bill told Jacob over the phone. "FBI, private investigators, bounty hunters if necessary. I want Emma found." "Already on it," Jacob replied. "FBI has issued a federal warrant for Diane, kidnapping across state lines. Every highway patrol, every local PD, every federal agent is looking for her car." But 12 hours passed with no leads. 24 hours, 48 hours. Diane had disappeared, and Emma with her. Rebecca lay in her hospital bed, hooked to monitors, feeling her second daughter kick and move inside her, while her first daughter was God knows where, with a woman who'd proven that she'd do anything to protect her son. This was despair, complete and total. The kind that made you understand why people stopped fighting, why they gave up. But Rebecca didn't give up, because 60 hours after the kidnapping, a motel clerk in Tennessee saw a woman matching Diane's description with a small blonde child, saw the Amber Alert poster in the break room, made the call that changed everything. FBI raided the motel room at 3 a.m., found Diane asleep with Emma curled against her. The toddler was unharmed, fed, clean, cared for, but confused and asking for mama. Diane was arrested on the spot. Federal kidnapping, child endangerment, drugging a minor, crossing state lines to evade arrest. She was facing 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Emma was airlifted back to Seattle, placed in an FBI helicopter and flown straight to Bill's estate, where Rebecca waited with arms that ached to hold her daughter. The reunion was tears and joy and trauma all mixed together. Emma clung to Rebecca, kept saying, "Mama, mama," wouldn't let go even when she fell asleep. Rebecca held her daughter in her swollen belly and understood that she'd just experienced every mother's worst nightmare. And that nightmare had been orchestrated by Marcus Hartwell's mother. The same woman who'd taught Marcus that women were objects to be controlled. The same woman who'd planned Rebecca's marriage like a business transaction. The custody hearing was in 3 days, and Grace Morrison had just gained a nuclear weapon for their case. Diane Hartwell wasn't just an accomplice anymore. She was a federal felon who'd kidnapped her own granddaughter. The judge was going to bury Marcus so deep he'd never see daylight again. 3 days after Emma's rescue, Rebecca walked into the courthouse carrying her daughter on her hip and 6 months of pregnancy in her belly. She wore a modest dress that covered the fading bruises, minimal makeup that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. Marcus sat across the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He'd been arrested the day after Diane's kidnapping attempt. Violation of the protective order, witness intimidation, and about a dozen other charges that Bill's legal team had buried him under. He looked thinner, older. The charm that had once fooled Rebecca was gone, replaced by barely controlled rage. Grace Morrison stood at the plaintiff's table, every inch the elite attorney in her tailored suit and perfect posture. Marcus's public defender, Diane had mortgaged everything to post Marcus's bail initially, but after her arrest, there was no money left, looked overmatched and underprepared. The gallery was packed. Bill and Catherine in the front row, Jacob Torres with his files of evidence, Dr. Elena Rodriguez ready to testify, Detective Sarah Mitchell in her dress uniform, Amanda Pierce, who'd flown in from Seattle, Vanessa Cole, who'd taken time off work to be here. An army assembled to destroy one man. Judge Patricia Hamilton entered, 60-year-old black woman with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for being brilliant and utterly unforgiving of bullies. Be seated. We're here for emergency custody proceedings in the matter of Emma Hartwell, age 18 months. Mr. Hartwell, you're requesting full custody based on claims that the mother is mentally unstable. Mrs. Hartwell, you're requesting full custody based on claims of domestic violence. Let's begin. Marcus's attorney went first. Put up character witnesses, co-workers who called Marcus a devoted father and good guy. Presented the recording of Rebecca talking about disappearing with Emma. Your Honor, my client is a loving father who's been falsely accused by a vindictive wife. Ms. Hartwell has documented mental health issues, has admitted to suicidal thoughts, and has made threats to kidnap the child. Mr. Hartwell only wants to protect his daughter. Grace stood. Your Honor, may I present Exhibits A through Z? For the next 2 hours, Grace Morrison systematically destroyed Marcus Hartwell. Exhibit A, Dr. Rodriguez testified about Rebecca's medical records. 8 emergency room visits in 2 years. Every injury consistent with domestic violence. Photos of the broken tooth, the bruises, the old fractures. Exhibit B, Detective Mitchell presented 3 previous victims. Amanda Pierce testified in person, her voice steady despite the trauma. He isolated me, controlled my money, and nearly killed me. When I tried to leave, he threatened to destroy my career. I dropped the charges and disappeared. Jennifer Schultz on video. He broke my arm, told the police I fell. They believed him. Sarah Martinez via deposition. He choked me until I passed out. I was 19. I thought it was my fault. Exhibit C, Vanessa Cole took the stand, her voice shaking but determined, showed photos of her bruises, testified about Marcus beating her until she miscarried. He told me to get an abortion or he'd ruin my life. When I refused, he came to my apartment drunk and beat me. I lost my baby because of him. She presented emails between Marcus and his mother, planning Rebecca's marriage like a financial transaction. Once I get custody, child support equals $10.8 million over 18 years. That's the goal. Exhibit D, Jacob Torres testified about Marcus's debts. $350,000 owed to bookies, loan sharks, credit card companies. He researched Mrs. Hartwell for 6 months before accidentally meeting her. Every moment of their relationship was calculated to trap her and access her family's wealth. Exhibit E, Grace played the full recording that Marcus had used as insurance. Not the edited version, but the complete conversation. Rebecca's voice. Sometimes I think about disappearing with Emma. Friend's voice. Why, what's wrong? Rebecca. Marcus has been hurting me. I'm scared, but I can't leave because he has this recording. He'll use it to take Emma away from me. Friend. You need to tell your parents. Rebecca. I can't. He'll destroy me in court, make me look crazy. The recording was bait. Marcus had wanted Rebecca to say those things specifically so he could weaponize them later. Judge Hamilton's expression grew darker with every exhibit. Finally, Grace called Marcus to the stand. Mr. Hartwell, do you love your wife? Ex-wife, and yes, of course I did. Then explain this email to your mother. Grace projected it on the screen. Once I get custody, child support equals $50,000 per month for 18 years. $10.8 million total. Marcus's face flushed. That's taken out of context. And what context makes it acceptable to view your children as retirement income? We were discussing finances. And this one? Another email appeared. Rebecca's almost broken. Few more months and I can file for divorce. Claims she's insane. Get full custody plus billionaire child support. The courtroom went silent. Marcus's control snapped. He stood up despite his shackles, despite the bailiff's warning, and screamed, "That bitch Vanessa had no right to steal my emails." Mr. Hartwell, the judge warned, "This is bullshit. That money is mine. I earned it dealing with her crazy ass for 2 years. He lunged toward Vanessa. Bailiffs tackled him, slammed him to the floor. His lawyer tried to salvage the situation, but it was too late. Marcus Hartwell had just proven every accusation against him. Judge Hamilton's gavel came down like a gunshot. Mr. Hartwell, you've just demonstrated exactly the violence and instability these women have described. I've seen enough. Well, she looked at her notes, at the mountain of evidence, at Marcus being restrained by 3 bailiffs. Full custody to Rebecca Hartwell, effective immediately. Marcus Hartwell receives supervised visitation only, 1 hour per month in a state facility with a trained monitor present. Restraining order extended 1,000 feet from Mrs. Hartwell, Emma, and the Hartwell family properties. Criminal trial for assault, fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation will proceed separately. She paused, looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Hartwell, I've been on this bench for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of domestic violence cases. Yours is one of the most calculated, most predatory, most disgusting I've ever encountered. You targeted vulnerable women, isolated them, abused them, then used the system designed to protect them as a weapon against them. Your mother taught you well. She'll be serving 15 years in federal prison for kidnapping. I hope you join her soon. Gavel down. We're adjourned. Rebecca walked out of that courtroom with Emma on her hip and tears streaming down her face. She'd won, actually won. Bill and Catherine surrounded her, protective and proud. Grace Morrison accepted congratulations from the other attorneys. Amanda, Vanessa, and Sarah Mitchell stood together, 3 survivors who'd helped save a 4th. Outside the courthouse, they celebrated, quietly, because Marcus was still free on bail pending his criminal trial. But they'd won the custody battle. Emma was safe. Rebecca was safe. And Marcus Hartwell was facing 15 to 25 years in prison for assault, fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges. At Bill's estate that evening, they gathered in the library. Champagne for most of them, sparkling cider for Rebecca. It's really over, Rebecca said, still not quite believing it. Not quite, Grace cautioned. Marcus posted bail this afternoon. Rebecca's glass froze halfway to her lips. What? How? Diane mortgaged her house before she was arrested. The bail bondsman accepted us. He's out until the criminal trial in 3 months. Bill's expression darkened. He can't come near us. The restraining order is just paper, Detective Mitchell interrupted. If he violates it, we arrest him. But restraining orders don't stop bullets. The celebration died. Marcus was free, furious, humiliated in court. He'd lost custody, lost his future income, lost everything. And men like Marcus, when they lost control, became most dangerous. I'll have security on the property 24/7, Bill said immediately. He won't get within a mile of you. But Rebecca saw the fire in her father's eyes, saw him realize that all his money, all his resources, couldn't guarantee her safety if Marcus decided violence was his only option left. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay in her childhood bedroom with Emma curled against her side and her unborn daughter kicking in her belly, and she tried to believe the worst was over. Tried to believe Marcus would accept his losses and disappear. Tried to believe she was finally safe. But at 2 a.m., the security alarm started screaming, and Rebecca knew. Marcus had come for his final revenge. The security alarm shattered the silence at 2:17 a.m. Rebecca jolted awake, Emma still sleeping beside her, drugged by the exhaustion of a traumatized toddler who'd been kidnapped and returned within 1 nightmare week. Bill's voice came through the house intercom, controlled but urgent. Rebecca, stay in your room. Lock the door. Security team is responding to a perimeter breach. But Rebecca was already moving, scooping Emma into her arms, backing toward the bathroom. The only room without windows, the only place that might be safe if someone was in the house. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Running, Patterson, the head of security, appeared at her door. Ma'am, we have an intruder. Came over the back fence, disabled the alarm system, knew exactly where the sensors were. Marcus, he'd installed that system 2 years ago as a favor to Bill, back when he was still playing the role of devoted son-in-law. He knew every weak point, every blind spot. Where is he? Lost him on camera near the East Wing. He's in the house. The East Wing, where Rebecca's childhood bedroom was. where the nursery was being prepared for the second baby, where Rebecca was right now. "Get my daughter out of here," Rebecca said, handing Emma to Patricia, who'd appeared behind Patterson. "Get her somewhere safe." "What about you?" Catherine demanded, her face pale. "I'm 6 months pregnant. I can't run. Get Emma to safety. That's all that matters." Bill arrived with his hunting rifle, looking every inch the Marine he'd been 40 years ago. "Patterson, get my wife and granddaughter to the panic room. Catherine, you're going with them. Like hell. Now!" The voice that had commanded men in combat. Catherine went, carrying Emma, who woke up crying for her mother. "Mama! Want Mama!" Rebecca's heart broke, but she didn't move. Couldn't. If Marcus wanted her, she'd face him here rather than let him chase her family through the house. The power cut out. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in eerie red. Marcus had found the breaker box. Then she heard it. A door closing. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside the nursery. Rebecca grabbed a lamp, the heaviest thing she could lift. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The nursery door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, backlit by red emergency lights. He had a gun. Not a hunting rifle like Bill's, but a handgun, small and deadly. He looked terrible. 3 days in jail had hollowed him out. His hair was greasy, his eyes wild, his hands shaking. "You destroyed my life," he said. His voice was ragged, broken, nothing like the smooth charm she'd fallen in love with. Rebecca forced herself to stand still, to meet his eyes. "Marcus, don't do this." "Don't do what? What's left for me to do? You took everything. My daughter, my future, my money." The gun shook in his hand. "I had a plan, a perfect plan, and you ruined it. Your plan was to abuse me until I broke, then take my father's money through child support. That was never going to work." "It would have worked." Marcus stepped into the nursery, gun pointed at her pregnant belly. "If your father hadn't shown up that night, if I hadn't opened the door," Rebecca finished, "if I'd kept lying for you, kept protecting you, kept letting you break me piece by piece until there was nothing left. You were weak, pathetic. Do you know how hard it was pretending to love you? Pretending you were anything more than a bank account with a pulse?" The words should have hurt. A week ago, they would have destroyed her. But Rebecca was done being destroyed by this man. "I know exactly what I was to you, an investment. But you know what, Marcus? You made a mistake. You married the wrong woman. You should have found someone without a father like mine. Someone without resources. Someone who'd stay quiet forever." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Your father, the great Bill Hartwell. He's the reason I'm here. If he'd just stayed out of it, he'd never stay out of it. You hurt his daughter. Did you really think he'd let that go? I thought I had insurance, the recording, the psychiatric evaluation. Evidence you were crazy. Evidence you fabricated," Rebecca shot back. "Did you really think a judge wouldn't see through that? They always believe the man. Every time. Amanda dropped charges. Jennifer took a plea deal. Sarah transferred schools. They all gave up. You were supposed to give up too." "I'm not them." Rebecca's voice was steel. "I had a father who went to war for me. I had resources. I had proof. And I had the courage to tell the truth." Marcus's gun hand steadied, finger moving toward the trigger. "If I can't have Emma, you can't have this one." He aimed at her belly. Rebecca had seconds to live, maybe less. Her unborn daughter kicked inside her, unaware that her life was about to end before it began. She forced herself to speak calmly. "Go ahead. Pull the trigger. Prove everyone right about you. They're already right about me. I've lost everything. Then what do you have to lose? 30 years in prison for assault or 50 years for murder? What's the difference to you?" Marcus hesitated. Rebecca saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him realize she was right. Killing her wouldn't save him, would only make things worse. "But Emma will know," Rebecca continued, her voice soft now, almost gentle. "Every year on her birthday, I'll tell her, your father murdered your baby sister, shot her while she was still inside me. She'll visit you in prison and ask why. What will you tell her?" The gun wavered. "Will you tell her you loved her, That you wanted to be her father? How can you say that while standing over her sister's grave? Marcus's face crumbled. For just a moment, one brief, human moment, Rebecca saw regret in his eyes, saw him realize what he'd become. Then Bill Hartwell appeared in the doorway behind Marcus, silent, deadly, moving with the precision of 20 years of Marine training. Bill tackled Marcus from behind. The gun went off. Bang! Bullet hit the ceiling, plaster raining down. Bill's hand closed around Marcus's wrist, twisted hard. Snap! The bone broke with a wet crack. Marcus screamed. Bill disarmed him in 3 seconds flat, had him face down on the nursery floor with his knee in Marcus's back before the echo of the gunshot faded. "You came into my house," Bill said, his voice colder than Rebecca had ever heard it. "Threatened my daughter. Tried to kill my grandchild." Marcus was crying now, broken wrist cradled against his chest. "Please, I'll disappear. I'll leave the state. Just don't." "You should have thought of that before you broke her tooth." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Detective Mitchell had been monitoring the security feed remotely, had called in SWAT the moment the perimeter was breached. Officers poured into the house, found Marcus Hartwell on the floor of a nursery, wrist broken, gun confiscated, Bill Hartwell standing over him like an avenging angel. They arrested Marcus for attempted murder, home invasion, violation of restraining order, weapons charges, and about a dozen other felonies that would stack up to guarantee he never saw freedom again. As they dragged him away in handcuffs, Marcus looked at Rebecca one last time. "I loved you," he said. "In my own way, I loved you." Rebecca met his eyes. "No, you didn't. You don't know what love is. You never did." Then he was gone, dragged from the house, screaming threats that would only add years to his sentence. Rebecca collapsed into her father's arms and sobbed. Not from fear anymore. From relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming weight of surviving something that should have killed her. "It's over," Bill said, holding his daughter while she shook. "He's not coming back. Not ever." And for the first time in 2 years, Rebecca believed it. The next morning, Bill Hartwell sat in an FBI interrogation room across from Marcus Hartwell. No lawyers present, Marcus had waived his right to counsel, desperate to hear what Bill had to say. Marcus looked like hell. Broken wrist in a cast, orange jumpsuit, no bail this time. He'd violated his restraining order, attempted murder, home invasion with a weapon. The judge had denied bail immediately. Marcus would sit in jail until trial, then spend the next 3 decades in federal prison. But Bill wasn't here to gloat. He was here to deliver a message. "Your tech company is bankrupt," Bill said without preamble. He opened his laptop, turned it so Marcus could see the screen. "I bought out your investors yesterday, then filed Chapter 11. Everyone you worked with? Unemployed as of this morning." Marcus stared at the bankruptcy filing. "You can't." "I did. $50 million civil lawsuit for damages to my daughter. Filed this morning. You'll never own anything again. Every penny you earn for the rest of your life goes to her." Screen 2 showed property seizures. "The house you rented, I bought the building, evicted you, your car, bought the lease company, repossessed your mother's house. She mortgaged it to post your bail. I bought the mortgage from the bank, foreclosed yesterday. She's homeless." Marcus's face went white. "Your professional network? Gone." Screen 3 showed Marcus's LinkedIn profile, deleted. "I sent your criminal record to every tech company in North America. No one will hire you. Your name is poison in this industry." Bill leaned forward. "Emma's adoption papers are being filed today. I'm legally adopting her, changing her last name to Sullivan. She'll grow up calling me Grandpa, never knowing you exist beyond a cautionary tale. You can't take my daughter." "I already did. You lost all parental rights yesterday when you tried to murder your second daughter. The one you'll never meet, never hold, never know her name." Bill showed one final screen. Photo of Rebecca with Emma and her swollen belly, smiling at Bill's estate, safe and happy. "Your second daughter will be born in 3 months. She'll grow up knowing her father as a monster who tried to kill her before she was born. That's your legacy, Marcus. Not a family, not wealth, just a Wikipedia entry about a domestic abuser who destroyed everyone he touched." Marcus was crying now, great heaving sobs that it shook his whole body. You wanted my money? Bill's voice was ice. You'll die in prison with nothing. You wanted my daughter? She's free, happy, and will forget you existed. You wanted my granddaughters? They'll have a better father figure in me than they ever would have in you. Bill stood. I didn't just win, Marcus. I erased you. Every trace of you. Gone. Your company, your career, your home, your mother's home, your future. You'll spend 30 years in a cell, and when you get out, you'll be 65 years old with nothing. No money, no family. No one who remembers your name except as a warning. Please, Marcus's voice was broken. I'll disappear. I'll never contact them again. Just let my mother keep her house. She taught you how to abuse women. She planned my daughter's entrapment. She kidnapped my granddaughter. Your mother is serving 15 years in federal prison. She deserves every day of it. Bill walked to the door, then paused. You should have thought of all this before you broke her tooth. He left Marcus screaming, pounding the table with his good hand, completely and utterly destroyed. Outside the interrogation room, Jacob Torres waited with a satisfied smile. That was brutal. That was necessary, Bill directed. Men like him only understand total annihilation. If I'd left him anything, any hope, any future, any shred of dignity, he'd have spent 30 years in prison planning revenge. This way, he has nothing left to fight for. His lawyer is going to argue that you're prejudicing the trial. Let him argue. I haven't done anything illegal, just exercised my legal rights to buy companies, foreclose on mortgages, and share public information about a convicted felon. The First Amendment protects my right to tell the truth about Marcus Hartwell. They walked out of the police station together. Bill checked his phone, text from Catherine saying Rebecca and Emma were having breakfast, both safe, both healing. One more thing, Jacob said. Vanessa Cole wants to talk to you, says she has a proposal. Vanessa met Bill at a coffee shop near the hospital. She looked better than the last time he'd seen her, less broken, more determined. I want to start a foundation, she said, for women like me, like Rebecca, like Amanda, women who get trapped by abusers and don't know how to get out. What kind of foundation? Legal aid, emergency housing, job placement, everything we needed but didn't have. Rebecca had you. She had resources, protection, a way out. Most women don't. They stay because leaving means homelessness, unemployment, losing their kids. Bill considered. How much do you need? $5 million to start, 10 to do it right. You'll have 15, and I want Rebecca to be co-chair. She needs purpose, needs to turn her trauma into something good. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to testify. You saved my daughter's life. They shook hands. The foundation, eventually called the Sullivan Foundation for Survivors, would help over 10,000 women in its first 5 years, would become a model for domestic violence prevention nationwide. But that was later. For now, Bill went home to his daughter and granddaughter, secure in the knowledge that Marcus Hartwell would never hurt anyone ever again. 3 months later, Rebecca went into labor at 39 weeks. Not premature this time, not stress-induced, just normal, healthy, right-on-time labor. Bill drove her to the hospital at 3 a.m., Emma asleep in her car seat in the back, Catherine calling ahead to make sure everything was ready. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was waiting. Rebecca had requested her specifically, trusting the woman who documented her injuries and believed her when no one else did. 10 hours of labor. Bill and Catherine in the waiting room with Emma. Grace Morrison stopped by with flowers. Amanda called from Seattle. Vanessa sent a care package. An army of support that Rebecca had earned by surviving. At 1:15 p.m., Sophia Grace Hartwell entered the world. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 19 inches long. Healthy lungs that announced her displeasure at the cold, bright world outside her mother's womb. Rebecca held her and cried. This daughter, conceived in fear, carried through trauma, nearly killed before she was born, was finally here. Safe, protected, free. Hi, baby, Rebecca whispered. Hi, Sophia Grace. I'm your mama. You're safe now. I promise you're safe. Emma was brought in to meet her sister. The 2-year-old peered at the tiny baby with suspicion. Baby sister? Rebecca explained. Her name is Sophia. Can you say Sophia? Sophia, Emma attempted. She reached out one finger, touched Sophia's tiny hand. Sophia's fingers wrapped around Emma's in that instinctive newborn grip. Emma's whole face lit up. My sister! Your sister. You're going to help take care of her, right? Yes, I help. Catherine and Bill watched from the doorway, both crying shamelessly. We almost lost them, Catherine said quietly. Both of them. But we didn't. Bill put his arm around his wife. And Marcus Hartwell is where he belongs. 1 week after Sophia's birth, the criminal trial concluded. Marcus Hartwell pleaded guilty to all charges. His lawyer had advised him that going to trial with the evidence against him would only result in a longer sentence. 32 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. He'd be 77 years old when he got out. Emma would be 33. Sophia would be 32. Both his daughters would be grown women with their own families, having never known him as anything but the man who tried to kill their mother. Diane Hartwell received 15 years for kidnapping. She'd be 75 at release. Mother and son would serve their sentences in different facilities, never seeing each other again. 6 months after the trial, Rebecca stood in front of a room full of domestic violence survivors. The Sullivan Foundation's first support group, meeting in a community center that Bill had bought and renovated specifically for this purpose. Vanessa sat beside her as co-founder. Amanda had flown in to speak. 30 women of all ages, all backgrounds, all sharing the same story of abuse and survival. My name is Rebecca Sullivan, she began. 6 months ago, my husband broke my tooth while I was holding our daughter. That was the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, depending on how you look at it. She told her story, the full story, the charm offensive that trapped her, the isolation that controlled her, the violence that nearly killed her, the recording that made her look crazy, her father's intervention, the custody battle, the kidnapping, the final attack, and the aftermath. I won't lie and say it's easy, Rebecca said. Some days I wake up and I'm still afraid. I check the locks 3 times. I flinch when someone raises their voice. I have nightmares about losing my daughters. But I'm also free. Actually, genuinely free for the first time in 3 years. I have my daughters, I have my family, I have purpose, and I have proof that leaving is possible. Surviving is possible. Thriving is possible. Around the room, women nodded. Some cried. Many had similar stories, trapped by men who'd isolated them, controlled them, made them believe they deserved the abuse. The Sullivan Foundation exists to help you, Vanessa added. Legal aid if you need to file for custody or divorce. Emergency housing if you need to leave tonight. Job placement if you need financial independence. Therapy if you need to heal. We're here because we were you. We survived. You can too. After the meeting, women lined up to hug Rebecca, to thank her, to share their own stories. One woman, maybe 30, with bruises poorly hidden by makeup, whispered, I'm scared to leave. He'll kill me. Rebecca took her hands gently. He might kill you if you stay. At least if you leave, you have a chance. We'll help you. Emergency housing tonight. Protective order tomorrow. Divorce lawyer next week. You don't have to do this alone. The woman cried, nodded, took the card with the Foundation's crisis hotline. She'd call 3 hours later. Would be in emergency housing by midnight. Would file for divorce within a week. Would rebuild her life just like Rebecca had. 2 years after Marcus's sentencing, Rebecca received a letter. It came from the federal penitentiary where Marcus was serving his time. The return address made her hands shake, but she opened it anyway. The letter was short. Rebecca, I know I have no right to contact you. I know you probably hate me, but I wanted you to know that I'm getting help. Real help. Therapy, anger management, trauma processing. I'm learning about the cycle of abuse, about what my father did to my mother, about what I did to you and Amanda and Vanessa and all the others. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I destroyed lives, nearly killed you and our daughter. There's no coming back from that. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to understand how I became this person, how I learned to see women as objects instead of human beings, how I let my mother's trauma become my own sickness. I hope you're happy. I hope Emma and Sophia are healthy and loved. I hope you've built a life worth living. You deserve so much better than me. Marcus. Rebecca read it twice, then put it in a folder with all the other evidence from the case. She didn't respond. Wouldn't respond. Marcus's healing journey was his own. She owed him nothing, but she did hope he meant it, hoped he was genuinely confronting what he'd done. Not for his sake, but for the sake of whoever might encounter him when he was 77 and released from prison. She hoped he'd learned that love didn't include violence, that women were people, not investments, that trauma was an explanation, not an excuse, and that some things couldn't be fixed with tears and apologies. 3 years after leaving Marcus, Rebecca started dating again. Carefully, slowly, with a therapist's guidance and her father's extremely thorough background checks. His name was David, a high school teacher who'd never been married, had no criminal record, and had volunteered at domestic violence shelters for a decade. He'd lost his sister to an abusive ex-husband, knew the signs, understood the trauma. Their first date was coffee in a public place with Bill's security watching from a distance. Their second date was a walk in the park with Emma and Sophia present. Their third was dinner at Bill's mansion, where Catherine interrogated David like a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. David passed every test. 6 months later, he proposed. Nothing extravagant, just a simple question over breakfast while Emma and Sophia argued about who got the last pancake. "I love you, Rebecca Sullivan. Will you marry me?" Rebecca looked at this man who'd been patient with her trauma, gentle with her daughters, and unfailingly kind, even when her fear made her push him away. "Yes," she said, "but we're having a long engagement, and couples therapy, and a prenup that my father insists on, and—" "Whatever you need," David interrupted gently. "I'm not going anywhere." They married 2 years later. Small ceremony, immediate family only. Emma was 6, Sophia was 4. Both girls served as flower girls, giggling their way down the aisle. Bill walked Rebecca down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. Whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Princess Owatam." Rebecca married David in a garden filled with sunshine and flowers and people who loved her. No shadows, no fear, just joy. Marcus's ghost had finally been laid to rest. 5 years after Marcus's sentencing, on a snowy December evening, Rebecca's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Rebecca, it's Vanessa. I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm getting married." Rebecca smiled. "That's wonderful. When did this happen?" "His name is Thomas. We met at a Sullivan Foundation fundraiser 2 years ago. He's patient and kind and nothing like Marcus. And I wanted you to hear it from me before I told anyone else. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air. Vanessa, who'd lost Marcus's baby to violence, was finally getting her chance at motherhood. "I'm so happy for you," Rebecca said, crying now. "You deserve all of it." "So do you. We both do. All of us do." They talked for an hour about healing, about moving forward, about building lives that trauma didn't control anymore. After hanging up, Rebecca found her daughters playing in the living room. Emma was reading to Sophia, both girls curled up on the couch under a blanket. "Mama," Sophia called, "Emma's reading me the princess story." "And the princess saves herself," Emma added proudly. Rebecca joined them on the couch, pulling both daughters close. David appeared with hot chocolate, kissed Rebecca's forehead, settled into his armchair with a book. This was her life now. Safe, boring, wonderfully, beautifully normal. Bill and Catherine arrived for their weekly Sunday dinner. Amanda called from Seattle, where she was celebrating her first anniversary with her husband. Grace Morrison sent photos from her vacation in Italy. The army that had assembled to save Rebecca had become a family. That night, after the girls were asleep, Rebecca stood in the nursery where Marcus had held a gun to her pregnant belly. David had helped her repaint it, turning the space from a crime scene into a playroom full of toys and books and laughter. She touched her flat stomach, remembering the terror of that night, remembering how close she had come to losing everything. Then she went to her bedroom, where David was reading, where her life was quiet and safe in hers. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm perfect." And she was. 7 years after Marcus's sentencing, the Sullivan Foundation held its annual gala. Over 10,000 women helped. Hundreds of families reunited, dozens of abusers prosecuted. Rebecca stood at the podium in a silver gown, Vanessa beside her, Amanda via video from Seattle. 7 years ago, I was a victim, Rebecca began. Trapped in an abusive marriage, isolated from my family, convinced I deserved the violence. Then my father showed up at exactly the right moment, and I made the hardest choice of my life. I asked for help. She looked at the audience full of donors, survivors, advocates. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. And having resources to offer that help, that's what this foundation is about. So thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting survivors. Thank you for believing us. The gala raised $15 million, enough to expand to 10 more cities, enough to help thousands more women escape. Afterward, a young woman approached Rebecca, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and hidden bruises. "I need help," she whispered. "My boyfriend, I don't know where else to go." Rebecca took her hand. "You came to the right place. We're going to get you somewhere safe tonight. Get you a lawyer tomorrow. Help you rebuild your life. You're not alone anymore." The woman cried with relief. Within hours, she'd be in emergency housing. Within days, she'd file for a restraining order. Within months, she'd be free, just like Rebecca, just like Vanessa, just like Amanda, just like 10,000 other women who had found the courage to leave and the resources to survive. 10 years after Marcus's sentencing, Rebecca received a call from the federal penitentiary. "This is Warden Collins. I'm calling about Marcus Hartwell." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He died this morning. Heart attack. Paramedics tried to revive him, but I'm sorry for your loss." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm not sorry. Thank you for letting me know." She hung up, told David, who held her while she processed the news. Marcus Hartwell was dead at 45. Had served only 10 years of his 32-year sentence. Would never know his daughters as adults. Would never have the chance to make amends. Emma was 12 now. Sophia was 10. Neither remembered him as anything but the bad man in Grandma's stories, the cautionary tale about what happened when people chose violence over love. Rebecca didn't tell them their biological father was dead. There was no point. David was their dad, the man who'd raised them, loved them, shown them what healthy love looked like. Marcus was just a ghost. And now even the ghost was gone. 15 years after leaving Marcus, Rebecca stood at her father's funeral. Bill Hartwell had lived to 83, had died peacefully in his sleep after a long, full life, had gotten to see both his granddaughters graduate high school, had walked Emma down the aisle at her wedding, had held his great-grandson. At the funeral, hundreds of people shared stories. Business partners talked about his ruthlessness in deals. Employees talked about his generosity with bonuses. Catherine talked about 60 years of marriage. But Rebecca's eulogy was different. "My father saved my life," she said simply. "I was trapped in an abusive marriage, terrified to ask for help. But he showed up anyway. Saw through my lies, assembled an army, went to war for me." She looked at Catherine in the front row, at Emma and Sophia, at David holding their baby son. "He taught me that love meant protection, that family meant showing up, that money was worthless unless you used it to help people. The Sullivan Foundation exists because of him. 10,000 women are free because of him. I'm alive because of him." Her voice cracked. "Dad, I hope you are proud. I hope you know that everything I am, everything I've built, everything I've survived, it's because you taught me that I was worth fighting for. Thank you for being my father. Thank you for going to war for your daughter. Thank you for destroying the man who tried to destroy me." The funeral ended. The reception was full of tears and laughter and stories about Bill's legendary ruthlessness and legendary love for his family. That night, Rebecca sat in her father's library, going through his papers, found a file labeled Rebecca. Inside were copies of every piece of evidence from the custody trial, every police report, every email between Marcus and Diane, every photo of Rebecca's injuries. And at the bottom, a letter in Bill's handwriting. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I wanted you to know that saving you was the proudest thing I ever did. Watching you, sir, rebuild, thrive. That was my greatest accomplishment. Not the buildings I built or the money I made. You. Keep fighting for survivors. Keep showing women that escape is possible. Keep being the warrior I always knew you were. I love you, princess." "Always, Dad," Rebecca cried until she couldn't breathe. Then she went home to her husband and children and the life her father had helped her build. 20 years after leaving Marcus, Rebecca stood at the Sullivan Foundation's 20th anniversary gala. Over 100,000 women helped. Thousands of families reunited. Hundreds of abusers prosecuted and imprisoned. Emma was 32 now, a lawyer specializing in family law. Sophia was 30, a therapist working with trauma survivors. Both had grown up knowing their mother's story, knowing what she'd survived, determined to carry on her work. Vanessa was there with Thomas and their 2 teenage sons. Amanda was there with her husband and 3 kids. Grace Morrison was there, retired from practice but still on the foundation's board. 20 years ago, Rebecca said to the packed ballroom, I was a victim who became a survivor. Now I'm an advocate, a founder, a mother and grandmother, a wife, a human being who refused to let trauma define her. She looked at the hundreds of faces watching her, donors, survivors, advocates, the next generation of warriors. To everyone who's helped the foundation, thank you. To every survivor who found the courage to leave, I'm proud of you. To every person who believed us when we said we'd been abused, you saved lives. And to the abusers who thought they'd won, you lost. We survived. We thrived. We built something beautiful from the ashes of your violence. You are forgotten. We are eternal. The ballroom erupted in applause. That night, Rebecca went home to the mansion where Bill had once gone to war for her. It was hers now. Catherine had passed 2 years ago, and the estate had gone to Rebecca. She stood in the nursery where Marcus had threatened to kill her unborn daughter, where Bill had tackled him to the ground, where everything had changed. Sophia's daughter, Rebecca's granddaughter, slept in a crib in that room now. 3 years old, safe, protected, loved. Rebecca touched the crib gently. Your great-grandfather built this fortress. Your grandfather tried to destroy it. Your great-great-grandfather saved it. And now you get to grow up safe inside its walls. You'll never know violence the way I did. Never know fear the way I did. Never know what it's like to be trapped. You're free, baby girl, and you always will be. Rebecca left the nursery, turned off the light, and closed the door on the past. She'd survived. She'd won. And the fortress her father built would protect her family for generations to come.